guess we can go ahead and get started here. Welcome to ICE class. That is the name of this class, and that is what is on the agenda today. And I am joined by two wonderful people that are going to take us through quite a lot of different things about ice, just in case you didn't know about the history of ice or how it was farmed historically, and then also how you can use ice in bar programs today. And that is Joey Houghtaling and also Mike McDonald. And guys want to give a little intro about like your background and where you come from, where you work, like how did you get into ice? Why ice of all things?
You want to go first or should I? You. I've been working in the service industry for roughly 16 years now, 17 years. I don't know, I lose track. I don't even know what day it is today. So
none of us do.
Mike and I have both been pretty up front and center in the development of the Milwaukee cocktail scene. And I used to actually make ice for a bar program by hand in little coolers, not using a Kleinbell or anything. So one day we had decided that maybe we should just buy Kleinbell and sell ice, which was a total nightmare for a while because there's not really a how-to guide on to start an ice company. We had to rely on a couple other people we knew that did it. Fat Ice in Texas was very helpful for us getting started. But yeah, beyond that, I still work behind the bar at Boone & Crockett in Milwaukee and Blackbird, and I also work at Joe's in Wauwatosa.
Yeah, we always look back to a specific moment that Facebook shares with us every year when I was at Joey's apartment and he was hand-picking ice out of a Tupperware container. And that was the best ice we could get in the state of Wisconsin, unless you were like throwing a huge wedding or something like that. So we've both been running bar programs, kind of helping out, again, like you said, in the scene. And we have traveled around the world. We've been to Portland Cocktail Week, to Camp Run Amok, to all these events, and there's just no ice anywhere in Wisconsin for bars to use in their programs unless they made it themselves, which is very hard. It's not very efficient. So we just decided we had like a moment in our careers where we had the opportunity to invest in something like that, and then also had the space to do so.
So now with the COVID, we made a decision before Wisconsin did with the stay-at-home order to stop production to make sure we were following CDC guidelines. Mike and I also had a plan so that we could still operate our business together in the same room. So we kind of made sure we were, we had not been around a lot of other people, but we're still operating in the facility we are, which is a local distillery in Madison, which is producing sanitizers. So that place is very clean. And we kind of furloughed the other people that work for us for the time being. And my roommate Jackson, who's also a Run Amok alum, who is the other camera guy over there, has kind of taken on the responsibility of cutting with me now, so we can trace contact just in case.
Show us your face, Jackson. There he is. Thanks for being our token camera guy today.
We most importantly want to make sure that when we are still selling ice, we're delivering and allowing curbside pickups at a couple points. But we wanted to make sure we were super safe in handling it, and we knew what we needed to do to be safe. So yeah, it's been a little bit of a struggle because obviously we've lost a majority of 80% of our business, but we're pretty confident that we have a plan in place that we'll push more into retail now, and we're working with some different spirits groups on Facebook to advertise, and it's been a slow, gradual increase in business to homes and to consumers, but we're staying alive, and we'll be around when it's all over, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's great to hear that you guys are still hanging in there with what you can do. You actually told me a really interesting story when we were talking last week on the phone about how you used to basically manually freeze ice for your bar program. Do you want to tell that story? Because I felt like those numbers were just really
yeah. So I'll show you guys a little bit more about this in a bit. But these little igloo coolers here, they're about 13 by 9. I used to fill 22 of these every 3 days and break them down by hand in a bar program that I was working at, and that was just very tedious. But we were the only bar in the city that had the clear ice at the time, so people were starting to become interested in buying it for me, and I didn't feel comfortable doing that without taking the proper channels to ensure safety through the government and making sure we were following all the regulations. But yeah, this was we basically freeze everything in here, and I'm going to show you how to do this in a little bit. But yeah, I did 22 of these a week by hand. Bunch of different methods. I read a bunch online. I've developed some of my own little tricks and secrets to doing it. It's a lot easier to do it now because we have the big climb out machine that does it, and we use bandsaws to cut it. And this has been the first time I think I'm hand cutting ice in like almost 2 years. So, but it's going to be neat because I'm going to be able to show you guys how to do it with like tools you can curbside from a hardware store, and you can order this from Amazon. Actually, all the things can probably come from Amazon, to be honest with you, and you won't even have to go anywhere to get them. So, but I think Mike's going to dive into a little bit of the history of actual ice and ice farming, and then we'll get into the production aspects in a little bit.
Yeah, just really quick before we get into that, I just feel like the fact that you used to do 22 of those a week just actually shows your commitment to ice. And so that's, like, that's why, like, you're the man for this, because some serious commitment.
That's the reason why is I was starting a distillery in Madison, and I wanted to create the ice the same way he was, and actually purchased all of that equipment. And then one day, I don't know whether it was over, a Negroni or something, and we just decided that we should just put some money into it and just go all in. And
it was probably the Negroni.
Yeah, we've actually built the business up from just taking money out of our own pockets. We haven't lent any money.
Well, I should actually introduce myself too, just real quick before we get into the content of the class. If you don't know me, my name is Jessamine McClellan. I'm the Academy Lead for Campari America, which basically means I'm the education guru for the company. These sessions are sponsored by Campari Academy, so they're just like a wonderful way for us to be more involved with our bartending community and to bring people who are super knowledgeable about different topics to the forefront. So we're really grateful of our partnership with Portland Cocktail Week. And this particular session is sponsored by Campari, as you can see by the lovely, perfect Campari bottle in front of Joey and Mike today. So I'm sure we'll see some fancy ice later, perhaps with some Campari along with it. Yes, that was a wonderful Vanna White impression there. But without further ado, you guys want to take it away with your the history of ice.
Yeah, so we didn't want to get into like the deep history of ice. We can go back to the Indians, the Egyptians, the Romans, and everything of that sort. But we actually have a rich history of ice here in Wisconsin. I mean, just because of where we are up north, we have cold, long winters, and we have lots of fresh water. So lots of areas with the same climate as ours, this is probably a common tale, is that we didn't produce ice, nature produced ice, and we just harvested it. So back in the day, we were basically harvesting ice out of frozen lakes and streams, and the ice was frozen in a process that would slowly, obviously, lakes and streams, they fluctuate in temperature and they are in constant motion as long as they are natural systems, and they freeze ice layer by layer, which pushes all the impurities to the top, which is basically what we'll talk about in the future is the climb bell. We're basically mimicking that process. So that is basically, we pulled ice from lakes. It was cut with huge saws, pulled out with ice tongs by hand. Obviously, as the processes became more efficient, they used new tools to pull them that were a lot easier to use than like hand saws and tongs. They were later stored in ice houses. So these are basically sheds. Ice was stacked as closely as possible, and then covered in sawdust to insulate the product. And then once they were full, they were packed full of sawdust to insulate them until their use. This was all around the 1800s, mid 1800s, 1850s. And commercial harvesting of lake ice was standardized by that time, about the 1850s. Ice was regularly harvested as a commodity, so like right up there with cotton and grain. Ice was the third largest export in global trade. So that stemmed a lot from our region and areas like ours, where Wisconsin and Maine were actually described as having the best quality ice based on how compact it was, how clear it was, and the ease of transport. And a lot of that had to do with the development of the brewing industry here, meat packing, those sorts of things. So they were looking for ways to cool rooms, cool their wort, and cool the meat, whether it's in place or in transit. And a lot of that was building up in Milwaukee and Chicago. So we were actually in a great place to provide these products for the nation, for that matter.
So what he's saying too is if modern day, if you want to kind of take yourself back to that time, if you've ever been ice fishing, when they cut the ice chunk out of the water to make the hole, that you're going to fish in. If you look at that big slab they're pulling out, the center of it will still remain crystal clear, even though the lake's water is probably not safe to drink at this point. Maybe it is. But yeah, that's if you've seen that, then you pretty much have seen what they used to do when they used to harvest ice.
Yeah, and outside of that, I mean, I was looking into this Madison, where I hail now. Most of actually there's 2 lakes. Obviously, we're on an isthmus, so we're surrounded by 2 lakes, and there was a massive ice business there. Most of the current actual city-state parks were where the operations were based for ice production. And these were 2-story tall buildings with conveyor belts where men would cut the ice and then they would send them up by horse and then to the conveyor belt to be broken down and later stored in massive ice houses and thrown on the railroad, which was being built between Milwaukee, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Chicago. What's that? Yeah.
So with that being said, do you have any questions for us with the history?
Well, I actually have a question about, and maybe more of a comment, but are you guys going to get into the science of why it freezes clear like that? I feel like people want to know.
Yeah, it's the current that moves through the lakes, and when water's moving and freezes, it won't trap any air inside of it or any minerals. So that all comes to the top of the ice. So when I was saying if you go ice fishing and they cut the slab out, just the center portion is going to be crystal clear. All of the air and minerals went to the top and froze, and that's where you'll get a cloudy piece. So even when we use our modern day Kleinbell machine, on the top we still get just like a tiny layer of foggy ice if there's any air or minerals in the water, which we shouldn't be because we use reverse osmosis water in our ice. But yeah, everything just pushes up. So nothing can get trapped if the water's moving because it kind of like layers itself. So imagine just like taking layers of cream or frosting on a cake and putting them on there, all the new layers. It doesn't trap anything inside of it.
Yeah, it also has to do with hydrogen bonds. It's very unique in water as it is literally H2O. But the way that ice forms, it's like perfect crystalline structure, not only just like water, but this is true for any sort of crystal. Like when you talk about the clarity of diamonds, it's the same thing. And it's just that those bonds are forming perfectly, and that's why it becomes so clear. So it's a combination of all of that stuff, which has to do with why it becomes clear. But you can't really achieve it if you don't do one directional freezing at all. So it's kind of amazing that it's something so simple that happens in nature, but it took us forever in the bartending community to figure it out.
Yeah, without any interruption and an introduction of dust particles and oxygen particles, so that process of constant motion of the water is very important.
So when we move on and start talking about more modern ice production, obviously we're at a little bit of a disadvantage for visuals here because we couldn't drag our giant Kleinbell machine to my basement safely. So that's still in Madison, and so is our bandsaw. But we can kind of explain it. So the Kleinbell has 2 giant chambers, and inside of those chambers are 2 freezing plates on the bottom. And we line it with a big bag, fill it with water, and then there's 2 nautical pumps that we use 2 on each bin to make sure we don't have any problems. We've actually found better pumps that we use so we don't have any like little specks in there or little bubbles. But we run those, and that keeps in constant motion. And then over the course of a couple of days, it'll freeze all the way up. And basically what we do is we use the engine hoist to pull that out of the Kleinbell machine, the block, and then depending on the time of the year here, because our facility is a little bit weird as far as the temperature control right now, we either have to temper the ice for a little bit, which means allowing the ice to melt down a little bit and soften up and expand. Or if it's cold enough, we can normally dive right in there and start cutting it up. And what we do with that big block is we break it down with a chainsaw first, and then we run it through a bandsaw to process it down to, I think we cut like 11 different size cubes for all of our accounts around the state now. So we definitely do a lot more customization than I've seen some other ice companies do out there. And then after that, we throw it on pans that we have kept in a freezer, and we put it back in the freezer, and then we let them refreeze a bit. We bag them and then throw them in coolers and deliver them to bars, basically.
In a nutshell.
That's what we do. There's a bunch of different the tools that we use. We have a chainsaw down here. I'm pretty sure most of you know what a chainsaw looks like, but I'll just
we have one.
We have a chainsaw.
Show us anyway.
Our nice ones out in Madison, taking a little vacation itself. We use some other tools as well. We've done some customization with like drill bits, like sculptors do. We have some like different branding options I'll get into when I actually cut a little bit of ice for you guys later. As far as the modern stuff's concerned, we pretty much stole all of these ideas from ice sculpting companies, because nobody just decided, like, the Climbell wouldn't exist without an ice sculpting company, to be honest with you. So we can kind of here's to them for giving us the idea of taking these things and not making like a giant turtle, but making an ice cube for a cocktail.
Or an ice luge.
Just to give people like a frame of reference too, is I know you obviously can't bring the Climbell, and you can't really bring a Climbell piece of ice, but like, how big is that? Try to explain that. If no one's ever seen it before, how would you explain that?
Machine?
It's like 40 by 10, right?
Yeah, I might be able to get. You're talking about the chambers or the actual machine itself? The machine itself is pretty big. It's about 8 feet by 8 feet.
Well, like, no, the size of like the block of ice, because I always think it's like there's something sort of like spiritual about looking at a giant block of ice from a Climbell. So there's probably people watching that have never seen a Climbell and don't know what that looks like or how big that ice cube is.
Maybe not.
Let's see.
So they make 2 300-pound blocks at a time. They're about 40 by 10 by 10, depending on how deep we fill them. Some people just fill them up to about 4 inches from the top. Others fill them up to the top. We find more success in kind of getting right to that sweet spot where they're about 40 by 10 by 10. So they are pretty massive. They're almost as tall as us. And we pull them out. We obviously don't stick them on their heads, but
they weigh about 350 pounds.
Yeah,
somewhere in there, depending. Like you said, we found a sweet spot at times of the year with the regulated specs that we were given by Climbell. Other times we actually overfill a little bit to cheat it and get a little bit more ice. We found some success doing it that way as well. But the machine basically is just a big silver box. You would never know it's an ice machine. You would never know what it's doing unless you pull the top off. And then instead of processing down, we use a bandsaw that's meant for cutting. And so these bandsaws are meant for breaking down cows. So they're meant for going through bone. So they cut through the ice pretty well. And we don't do much with any like sort of spears. We like the square shapes at Beaker and Flask. We like the way they melt down a little bit more.
Yeah, there's a lot of waste when it comes to spheres as well.
Right, yeah. I'm making a sphere. Obviously, you're cutting off all of the corners, so it's going to be more challenging for you guys to produce, too, I'm assuming.
People really want spheres. There is a way to do it by hand. I like the squares myself, so I never really got into picking ice by hand. I like to just rip it through the bandsaw.
I mean, it looks really
get
cool.
To the drinking part.
But
yeah.
Also, there's a couple options out there. Like Houghtaling Kingdom sells like a press that'll press it into a ball for you. And we have a couple accounts that really like that, so they bought that. We sell them the block sizes that they need.
Yeah, but they're about 3 inches by 3 inches, and they break down to about 1 1/4.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways. The cube,
most of half of it's just being lost.
Yeah, the cube I think is like 2 1/4 inches exactly for the smaller press for the Houghtaling Kingdom ice sphere maker. But yeah, we definitely cut those. We try to customize as much as we can. As far as other modern ice cutting tools, some people use like a log chainsaw, so you can just kind of push it through. Like the bigger guys that are pumping out, ice to a whole state, and retail and millions of cubes a year, they use those.
Kind of similar to like classically what you would have used if you were pulling it from a lake, like one guy on each side or one person on each side pulling back and forth, hemming and hawing to get to break the ice apart.
I pictured everybody wearing like old-timey clothing doing that as well. It just feels right.
Right. Yeah. And there actually are people in Wisconsin, I'm sure elsewhere as well, that still do this. They still, every year, they pull ice from lakes in northern Wisconsin.
That's amazing.
Close to home.
By the way, there's a lot of love for Wisconsin on the comments today for you guys, so you should be proud. Especially since apparently I learned today that Wisconsin has the best ice historically as well. So, Wisconsin pride.
So when we look at like making ice at home and how I started learning how to do this, so there's a couple keys. You need your little cooler here, and the reason these work is because the walls give a little bit. So in the Climbell, when it freezes, there's springs. So when the water expands into an ice block, there's some give, and that allows it to remain crystal clear. So when I use these, I fill it up about 3/4 of the way, probably like right up to here. And the key to the water that you're putting in here is if you're taking it off your faucet, you actually want to let it set in there for about a day or two, because on most faucets, there's aerators, and that's actually just putting more air in the water. So if you try taking that water right from the faucet to the cooler into a freezer, it's going to cloud up, and there's going to be little specks in it. So that's one of the tricks I learned. I've seen people use like store-bought distilled water if that's what you want to do, but I'm kind of focusing on you guys being able to buy these things now if you want clear cubes at your house. And the most we can keep you inside and at your house is the safer the better. So
it should also be clear that like filtered water, boiling water isn't necessarily necessary to create clear ice. Like that is something that has been perpetuated that is false. Like you do not need to have ultra pure, clean, boiled, Brita filtered water to create clear ice. It's literally this process that we're talking about.
So once you get your water in that little cooler, the other thing I found that works really well is I like to use a chest freezer if available, one that I will not go into during the process of the freezing. If you put it into like your normal freezer and you open the door up, what's going to happen is that there's going to be like these little shooting star looking like air pockets in there. And that's just from the motion while it's freezing. So while the ice is freezing, if it stays undisturbed in the cooler, you're going to get a much clearer block, like the one we're going to show you in a little bit here. And I used to have to yell at people at the bar when I was doing the 22 coolers full to not like sit on it or not like, kick it in frustration as they walk by, or because it was downstairs in the kitchen, and it was a struggle a little bit, but I got it dialed in. I started like insulating with foam so they would take some of the shock. But that's one of the keys I found. The other thing I found is you do want to check it after 24 hours, and it shouldn't be fully frozen yet, depending on your freezer. And it's best when there's a little bit of water on the top to pull it out and then to start cutting it, which I'm going to show you how to do here in a second. Because if you freeze it all the way, there probably will be a big ball of air somewhere in it, as there's no more room for it to expand. So you want to kind of stop the freezing right before it's going to end and have it be a little bit wet when you cut it, because then it'll be tempered down and expanded to the point where it's soft enough to cut very easily. And it'll save you a lot of frustrations in this process. There's a lot of good resources out there that kind of explain how to do this, but those are like two of the tricks that I found work the best for having to cut 300-400 cubes a week manually.
Hey, Joey, we got a question that came up in the comments about wouldn't you prefer to use filtered water just for taste, even if it doesn't actually help? Like
100%, absolutely. When our ice that we produce and sell, we actually use reverse osmosis water. We're very blessed to work in a distillery that allows us to take from the reservoir. For the non-nerds out there, do you want to explain what reverse osmosis water is, just for a second?
I mean, no, not really. I mean, it's a sciencey process.
It's basically pure water.
It's basically just water. So basically
pure water.
Out of it. So it is H2O, and that's what it is. There, all the fluorides, chlorides, all that stuff is taken out of it. It's basically taking water back to like what water is, and that's the easiest way for me to explain it. Not being a scientist,
right? He works with it way more than I do, but what I've realized with reverse osmosis water is you don't want to water your plants with it because there's no minerals in it, and your plant.
Yeah.
I thought I was being clever, and I'm really bad at plants. I have a dog, and that's fine, and I'm a really good dog dad, but a plant dad I'm terrible with. And I was like watering plants with reverse osmosis water, and it's so pure that there's no nutrients in it for the plants, and the plants actually all died. Sad story. But yeah, the reverse osmosis water, you see a lot of it now in the market too for drinking. I know it definitely helps me with my hangovers more than like our faucet water.
It's also used in spirit production. So usually every spirit is diluted with reverse osmosis water. So it is like the purest form. So it doesn't adulter the product. So that's also like, we don't need to use it to make our ice, but we do because we have it on hand. And when people use our ice in their cocktails and in their spirits, it is unadulterating that product with any other, minerals or chlorides and fluorides and stuff like that. So yes, filtered water is great, but it's not necessary for it to be clear.
And so when you're like, especially with higher end spirits, if you're a guy like some on the rocks like I do, I don't want any of that weird tasting minerally faucet water taste. But like I said, in these times, we're trying to just show people how to do it to be safe. So I guess, times are tough and we still have clear ice, but it might not be the reverse osmosis we're used to. So after we pull the block out of the little cooler here, moving back to the in-home ice production, there's a couple things. A cutting board is a necessity, and then I'm going to kind of show you guys all the tools you could get at a hardware store to do this. The first thing that's very important is I prefer this kind of saw. It's a little drywall saw. They're about like $8 to $10. You can kind of see the rivets of the teeth there. What I did is I looked at all the fancy Japanese ice cutting tools that are out there that are really, really expensive, where you're looking at like $300 to $1,000 a saw. And I just kind of like looked around in the hardware store for a long time to find these things back in the day when I was doing this. And I found a couple things, including this one that really are close to that.
And we're in Wisconsin, so like bone saws are readily available everywhere for breaking down meat products. So bone saws work as well.
This is the closest I found to a Japanese one. The only thing I noticed about this is that the rivets are meant to be only cutting when you pull back, which gets kind of annoying. So the drywall saw, you can go back and forth. And that's kind of a little bit better of a motion, I think, for getting the digital scoring done. This is just your standard 2-inch chisel. You can use an ice pick for this, but I find this works a lot faster. And you can kind of, when you're done, then you can kind of like square off the edges of the cubes when you're done cutting. Yeah, this has been really helpful to us for a lot of different reasons. You know, sometimes we would miss when we were starting out and trying to figure out how long the freeze times were. We'd sometimes freeze the pumps into the climb belt and have to chisel them out, and this was key for that.
Also, before we had our bandsaw, we literally were cutting with saws and chisels, and that's how we sold our ice. So we were literally doing it on a cutting board on top of our freezers and rebagging it and selling it. So that's how we started, actually. Another thing, like at home, I actually use at my girlfriend's house. We just use a bread knife, which works fine.
Yeah, any sort of serrated.
These are nice. These are great tools.
I found a watermelon knife actually worked pretty well one time. It's a very specialized tool, but it's like an abnormally long watermelon knife, which is basically like a bread knife, but it's
yeah. I haven't tried it. My bread knife has got to be almost like 1.5 feet.
Yeah.
Works. But this digs into the ice to get to, like, especially when you're starting out, or someone like me that hasn't hand cut ice in a while. It's a lot easier to get the groove in there with these. This I'm sure you have in your house already. This is called a hammer. And you'll use this to hit the top of the chisel to kind of pop the ice out. I'll show you that in a second. And then I do like to keep some kind of ice pick around just to kind of hold the ice in place. This is just a single one. This is all I had at my house without going to the facility to grab one.
Yeah, and these are also great for like hand chiseling those cubes. I mean, the 3-prong ones are better. There are 3-prong ice picks to make your own like hand carved ice if you want that cute rough sphere or cube.
So we're gonna kind of change gears and move camera over to the ice block that I have here. So as you can see, this is what I pulled out of that little cooler. I was struggling a little bit with the tempering rate. And the tempering is just basically allowing the ice to melt a little bit so it's softer to cut. The temperatures changed so much, so my timing was a little bit off because we had to turn the air conditioning on. So it wasn't as warm in our house as I thought it was going to be. So as you can see, I kind of pre-scored it because I didn't know where we'd be at in the video, and I have a little piece ready to go here for you. But basically what you'll do when you pull this block out and it's melted down to this point is you're just going to kind of put a groove in it. You know, so you put somewhere to put the chisel. And once you've done that and it's melted down properly, this should essentially just pop out into a sheet. So the way, just get it kind of softly and it should start separating, as you can see there. So it's still a little bit too cold. And it should just come right. Boom.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Woo!
Now that we have that, we can move this other big piece for now.
And what are you doing with that piece? Are you just putting it back away so it doesn't melt entirely, or?
I'm just going to show you how to, essentially you'll keep doing this process until you get the whole block done. So I just wanted to move it out and see a little bit more.
So this was the first couple of months of Beaker and Flask right here.
This with like chainsaws though, basically. So you wanted to determine the size of your cube. I like to cut them close to where my glass is, like the size of my glass, which is that. So we're going to go a little bit smaller than 2 by 2, probably about 1.5 inches. You can actually measure this. And you're just going to kind of cut along there like I did last time and squirt it.
And it doesn't have to be that deep.
I find
I mean, how deep are you making that score? If you had to say like quarter of an
I
inch?
like to go about half a centimeter.
Okay. So
Round it off.
even, oh, actually, yeah.
Cutting board, having melting ice on it all day.
It's also nice if you have like non-stick gloves, which we don't have. Hard to find these days.
And then I'm going to do that same process here. This guy should just pop right out. So now you got yourself a nice cylinder. If you find that it's too big for your glass, you can always use the edge of this and kind of just scrape it down here. This will be a lot easier.
The chisel that you're using, is that about like 2 or 3 inches wide? What is?
It's a 2-inch chisel. Yep, you can get it any hard. I think this exact one was $10.
Yeah, you can get them lots of different sizes, obviously.
And you can just go back here and do that same process again. So now once you have that down, you're pretty much, you've got it. You're just going to keep scoring and then popping the cubes out. There we go. You've got
making me thirsty.
Ice cube, throw it right in there.
Pour some Campari.
Pour some Campari over it. There you go. I've never been a real, like when I was cutting by myself, I never really worried too much about making them perfect shapes because it's, it's clear ice. You can hardly tell it's in there. But yeah, like I said, use the edge of that chisel to kind of scrape them down to be very square. So when you're done doing that, what I recommend doing at home is having a couple of cookie sheets in the freezer. So they're very frozen, and then you can take these wet cubes and kind of place them on there and they'll stick. And then you can put them back into the freezer, let them sit for a couple hours, and then you can take them and bag them. The one thing you don't want to do when you're using the cubes at home, especially if you're doing straight spirits, is to just with room temperature spirits, you don't want to just pull a cube out of the freezer. If you're stirring a cocktail, this can work, and you can get it down to temp. But if you take liquid that is too cold, or the ice that's too cold and the liquid that's not, you're going to notice something awful that's going to happen to your clear ice.
I know what's going to happen. Oh, the horror.
It must be cold.
Must be cold enough. It's not going to crack. Well, I was going to show you.
I was hoping for an audible crack, but yeah.
You can see in there, it actually cracked a little bit. On that. So to avoid that, just let the ice sit out for a little bit until you can see through it and the initial frost gets off of it, and it should be pretty clear.
Yeah, so tempering is important at all levels of breaking down your big blocks of ice and also like using it in a drink. If the drink isn't cold enough or you're just pouring straight spirit over it, you're basically ruining the product that you created to make your sexy drink. Like you want it to be clear, you want it to be baller. Like if you just pour room temperature spirit over this like very cold piece of ice, it's going to crack, and that defeats the purpose. You might as well just be pulling ice out of one of your molds.
So another thing that we kind of like to do, and I know some of you guys probably order some brands and Brandalism and some other companies out there that are really great. If you want to do one for your home, you don't want to spend a ton of money. We have some resources on Etsy you can look up for etching. And I like to keep one at home. My friends come over. I'm kind of a dork. I have a little brand I like to use on here. And all you do is you kind of press this little brand guide into the cube to make a little design in it. And you get yourself an ice cube.
What's the design? Sorry.
That is ice cube.
The wrapper. Stevens logo. A lot of people aren't so much worried, especially if you're using it for in-home use. You can get a little leniency on what you do with them. But that's my personal one, so that one never sees the light of day outside.
I think we have a Dwayne The Rock Johnson one as well.
Yeah, and a Vanilla Ice one floating around. But Mike has the State Line logo. A lot of our accounts get them. Press their bar logo into it. But yeah, if anybody wants those resources, feel free to reach out to us and we can shoot you in the direction of the company that'll make those for you inexpensively.
Yeah, it's a really nice way to customize, like, when life goes back to normal. I think I always remembered the guests in my bar just being like so amazed that there was something their ice.
Once they get the
Even if,
cube,
I don't know.
every time they come, and once they see like something Preston do it, it really is just like visually entertaining to them and the guests, because a lot of people don't have access to see the crystal clear ice the first time they see it. They do get blown away still, even though it's not anything terribly new at this point.
In Wisconsin, it is.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it may not be new to us, like as bartenders, but you would be shocked how many people are still like excited about smoked cocktails, for example. Like we live in a world where, we get bored of that kind of stuff pretty quickly, but like the average person walking into a bar is still going to feel super special because they have something cool in their eyes.
Oh yeah, no, before this all happened, I mean, every weekend at the distillery I work at, the ice was, center stage, and old fashions, and we have like at least 2 or 3 drinks on the menu, and there was always someone like, oh my God, what is this? How did you do this? This is amazing. How do I get some? So it's been great to see. It gets people really excited, and it's just like that thing that everyone in a big market has had as a consumer that now like people have in
Wisconsin. Yeah. What about storing your ice? Like if you're at home, what are the best ways to keep your ice fresh? Like we kind of talked about how to package them right before you put them in the freezer, but tips for that?
The frozen cookie sheet is the initial process. After that, I mean, we get like the 1 gallon Ziploc bags is essentially what we deliver in. We've done some boxing up with those bags, but I mean, basically just your standard Ziploc like this is how.
That looks so pretty.
Honestly, it's just use it. Do not sit on it. It's not something you want to keep in your freezer, because ice in general over time will just frost over. That's the way it happens. It's the way freezers cycle. And it's going to get frostier and cloudier. I mean, once you temper it, it'll still get clear again. But you just use it.
Drink more
as you would a bottle of vermouth. Use it as fast as
Drink responsibly. Consume your ice cubes responsibly. Amazing. We did have a question pop up a little earlier, which is about what are the next big things in ice? Like, are there any cool projects that you're not secretly working on, but things that you can talk about?
So things I've seen that I know that we're looking at doing is I've seen some pretty cool, like almost 3D printers available for ice. These are a lot in Japan right now, but they'll actually like 3D print a shape. So like if you wanted to make your actual face, you can do that through 3D printing software. There's also CDC machines that'll actually brand the cubes for you. I know some companies that cut with the CDC machine. It makes them look really neat. They can round out the edges a little bit and some of those things. We've looked into that. Right now our focus is just staying alive during this pandemic and coming out on top. We've looked at a couple other things too, but those we're going to kind of keep to ourselves right now.
I mean, making ice sculptures. We're always doing that. We haven't really educated ourselves to that level yet, but it's possible.
Is that next for you, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing that people that are watching this in the cocktail community haven't seen before. Crazy luges and stuff like that. We're in our infancy when it comes to stuff like that, but it's always on our radar when people, like, there are people that ask us about luges or stuff frozen in ice, whether it's roses, mint, anything of that sort. We made some lightsaber ice cubes for a bar called Boone and Crockett in town. So we put lights underneath the ice and had different color cubes for a Star Wars release party. So it's just kind of fun stuff like that. We're in our infancy again, so we're kind of learning, expanding, and seeing what everyone's doing around the country, around the world, and just step by step seeing what works for people and what they want.
Yeah, I think for like a solid 2 or 3 months, we were doing what's Joey gonna freeze in the ice this week, and I would freeze one object into ice to get used to doing that. We've done some customizations with like flowers, and we did a bunch of mint
Legos
for like Legos. That was me. I definitely want to put Legos.
Lego sharks.
Lego sharks.
You guys should start a new series that's like, the Will It Blend? It's just like people putting stuff into a blender. Like yours would be like, will it freeze? And it'll just be like things in ice cubes, like random inanimate objects.
Yeah, I think we could freeze just about whatever in there.
I would watch that. I would.
I mean, it'd be a really boring process. Like watching paint dry for a couple of weeks, but yeah, we've kind of taken around with a lot of different ideas. But like I said, right now we're only a 3 to 4 man operation, and we cover a good portion of the state and make deliveries twice a week. So we cover a lot of ground with a little bit of help. So once we expand a little bit, which is on the horizon, we'll definitely be doing a little bit more with the CNC machines and hopefully 3D printers at some point. So
we got another question. It's a little bit more about service logistics. Is it best to ice the stamp at the point of service, or can you pre-stamp them and store it with the same clarity level?
I like to do it at the point of service, and with service now, there's some options out there. Obviously, if you're pulling the cube out of a freezer that isn't at a lower temperature, it'll crack. So you want to make sure that the cube is at the right temperature, which is like just a little bit above freezing, and then it will press in. But I like to press them by drink. If you press them when they're really cold, like I said, they crack. What we do at my bars is we have like a little area in the ice well that has a divider that we keep some cubes in that they can drain out. We use those for like rock scorers. Other ones, we just train everybody in the bar to stir to the point where the cocktail's almost like freezing, and you can achieve that by buying like a cheap stick thermometer, like one that unfolds, and you can test people's stirs that way, and you'll know the ice won't crack. We did have some problems with some accounts when the ice first came in the market. They were just kind of like pouring under-diluted, under-chilled cocktails over them cracking. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Perlick, and I think Crown has got one coming out, but Perlick is about to release a freezer specifically for wells that has some ice that's tempering, and then some just for storage. So that's been very helpful. Boone & Crockett's actually one of the test markets for that because of my involvement with Perlick and us helping them. We supply them for all their ice for photos because they're located.
That's exciting. I want to see one of those little things.
Cooler our way, and we toss some ice their way. So we've been testing that with them, and so far so good. It's there's a couple little adjustments I think they're going to make before they release it, and but it's a really cool product. It can hold ice cream in the front and all sorts of stuff. I don't have anything here, but service is definitely adjusting to the ice.
And branding beforehand. So like he's talking about those CNC machines. Those are basically etching into the ice. Obviously, you either do that or we are literally hand branding each ice cube and then placing them on a tray or in a bag. And storage for that is just, it's going to get in the way of your space that you have in your freezer, because you're going to have to stack them up and make sure that nothing is like getting in the way of that logo as you're serving it. So I mean, it's ice, so it's going to break, it's going to chip, things like that. So if you brand it beforehand, you have to be very careful. You know, if you're throwing like a 5-person party, which you should be during Corona, then you can do it that way. But otherwise, I just think it's wasteful to do it until serve it.
You can also, there also might be some problems when the cube does melt down. You might lose the image, whereas if it's tempered down a little bit, the image is going to stick better. You also need to make sure that when they do this die cut, that the die cut is deep enough. Otherwise, the image will just dissolve off at some point. But it sticks in there pretty good with the ones that we created.
Awesome. Well, I don't have any more questions for you guys, but if anyone who's watching right now does have some more questions, feel free to put it up in the chat and we can address them. But a lot of love for you guys. Some love for my Campari jacket. Thanks, Marie Christopherson, for making this for me. Yeah, thank you so much, you guys, for sharing all your wonderful knowledge about ice. I think this was really informative. There's some people that are already saying that they're going to go buy the tools that you've recommended to make ice, so I think that's a good sign.
Nothing to do for the foreseeable future, so please feel free to just message me on Facebook or on Instagram. I'm Joey Duda, and I literally will walk you through the processes after this, because it's, you know, we limited time, limited resources, but I have nothing to do, and I'd love to help you guys do this in your home. So feel free to reach out. I normally respond within a couple hours because I'm constantly looking at my phone, I guess, because nothing else to do. So.
And we want to say thank you to Portland Cocktail Week. We've both been, we both love it. Campari, thank you. We love the product. We love everything you do. And we appreciate the way that you support our communities around the country and around the world.
Team at Lush.
Yeah. Thank you. Same. Thank you so much for Portland Cocktail Week for putting this on. And also, if you're not following along to all of our Campari community activities that we've been doing, you can follow our Campari community Instagram, which includes all of this Portland Cocktail Week programming that we're doing, as well as other things that our amazing brand ambassador team are putting on. So we got a lot of things happening on the internet for all of your learning pleasure. So I don't see any other questions coming up on the chat. So I think that you guys are free to go.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
And we're out.